Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Ready, Set, Read. We are going to discuss tonight some language and literacy strategies for students who are deaf or hard of hearing. My name is Amanda Schneider, and I am a deaf and hard of hearing education consultant with the Michigan Department of Education Resource for Deaf and Hard of Hearing. And thank you to Michigan Hanson Voices for inviting me to present this presentation. So just a quick outline of what we are going to discuss. The first is just talking about that partnership between language and literacy skills and how both things work together. Then we're going to talk about strategies to support language and literacy development, and then wrap up with resources that you can use to support those skill developments at home. All right, so let's start with the basics and make sure we all have the same understanding about some of these terms. So when we talk about what is literacy, oftentimes we think about just reading and writing, but really literacy is the interaction of the ways people come to use language. So that it adds in those pieces of thinking about the print, also thinking about in deaf and hard of hearing, working with those children, we have to think about listening or maybe viewing language, also signing or speaking, depending on the languages you use at home or if you use a combination of both. Literacy is also about thinking about language and processing and critically thinking about what can come next or having these conversations about different topics. And then also literacy in this day and age is being able to understand information across various types of media. So understanding what are the rules when we read books, when we read information on the internet, and then also social media and how those have different norms and different formats, and how literacy actually looks different in those different types of media. So I wanted to touch base on this idea of reading and understanding that it really is a learned skill. And there are multiple pieces that come into play when we talk about all the skills connected to reading. And really, experiences, daily routines, and play offer multiple opportunities to build and grow the foundation for reading and learning. Um, as we talk about these skills, I also want to make sure that we talk about this from a deaf and hard of hearing lens. Um, there are different perspectives and how reading is built based on those that have typical hearing, and then how it maybe is just a little bit different when we talk about children who are deaf and hard of hearing and how they develop these skills. So some of these terms may be more focused on a listening approach. And so I'm going to add in that piece as well about children who use maybe ASL as well as those that use a combination. Um, so just want to make sure that we're using that idea of taking some of these skills and adding in that extra piece. So let's quickly look at these different skills that support reading development. That first section is the skills we need for language comprehension. So talking about vocabulary knowledge, where children have to understand the meaning of words, using them within a context, and having a large foundation of words to use in a variety of different ways. Next is background knowledge. So children need prior knowledge to about a topic to then learn new information. And so we have to have that foundation to continue to move the learning forward. The next thing is language structures. So we're talking about knowledge of grammar, how we organize words in a sentence, and how we create meaning within that language. Next is literacy knowledge, or also called print knowledge, is another way. And it's really that structure of how a book or a text is set up and knowing how to navigate the pieces. So, for example, knowing that when we look at the cover of a book, we can find the title, we can find the author, and the illustrator. So, those are pieces that we can point out as parents. As we read with our kids, what are these norms that work within print? And then the next is thinking about verbal reasoning. And really, I want to change that lens to reasoning. So it's thinking critically to understand the constructs of meaning. And that can be from spoken language or sign language, and connecting that to the printed words. All right. Then we've got the skills for word recognition. So how we understand the print that we're seeing. So those pieces go into phonological awareness. So that's understanding that spoken words are made up of sounds and or signs are made up of hand shapes, movements, palm orientation, location, and also non-manual markers. Decoding is that breakdown of words into letter sound or syllable relationships, depending on language. And then sight recognition. So recognizing and permanently storing words. So some of those sight words that we talk about with younger children, like what do you just have to memorize? That's what we talk about with sight recognition. So all 8 skills are important for all readers, and how these skills develop with children who are DHH include everyday experiences and exposure with language and reading, as well as through some intentional strategies to strengthen these individual skill areas. So what I didn't mention in my introduction is I'm also a parent to a child who is deaf and hard of hearing. And so I also bring some of that practical ideas and strategies from my own personal experiences as well. So when we talk about strategies for building word recognition, this really is something different than for kids who are deaf and hard of hearing, because we aren't always focused, relying only on auditory input to support this skill. So I wanted to share just some other strategies that you can explore when you're talking about building these skills. One is finger spelling. So connecting an ASL sign to a printed word through finger spelling, and also connecting it to the visual sign. So for example, you can sign dad, then finger spell it, D-A-D, and then sign again, dad. Similar in spoken language, you can say the word dad, point to the print form of it on the page, and then say the word again. So that's kind of what we call a sandwich technique, where you're giving the information in a variety of ways to help build that connection. Sight recognition is also really a skill that's going to be on a spectrum, that's going to be individualized for students who are DHH, and it really can look different. So one example is just memorizing words, especially those ones that break the rules. A word such as have, that one isn't easy to sound out because it kind of breaks some of those rules we have. So we teach that as learning the whole word. Another strategy with that sight recognition is labeling items in your home. So putting print on items in your kitchen, items in the bathroom, and that allows you to have those opportunities for conversations or connections. And that can be to spoken language or that can be to ASL. So finding ways to just include print throughout your house can help with some of that sight recognition. There are also two different strategies for supporting students to kind of break down words into those phonemes. So supporting phonological awareness and also those decoding skills. One of them is cued speech, and that is a system of 8 hand shapes and 4 hand placements around the face that represent the 40 different phonemes used in the English language. So this is a system that you can use and learn at home. And that's also something that you can talk with your educational team about if that's a strategy they're using. And then the second one is visual phonics. So again, that's another system of gestures that can be used to show the sounds of spoken language. And it also has a written form to kind of help cue students into understanding those phonemes. So again, there is no one size fits all approach here. You may be using a combination of multiple strategies. So really it's working with your educational team to figure out what's going to work best for your child and what strategies can you support at home while you're reading. So thinking about how language and literacy are really two pieces that work together. And they can be strong partners in the skill development. So when reading with your children, you are really building their language comprehension skills. So reading books provides the opportunity to build that background knowledge about a variety of topics and also help to start making connections between words and those objects that you might see in pictures. It also introduces new vocabulary. So we only talk about different things in our world. So providing that opportunity with a book, you use different language than how you talk or sign, and you also have the opportunity to talk about the different topics in the book. So that's adding the new vocabulary. Reading also supports that development of language structure. So knowing how sentences are formed, what format they follow, and how that's connected to the story. And then engaging with print concepts and that word recognition. So being able to point to a word and also sign it or speak that word, like making those connections is really powerful. And then reading with your child is an opportunity to strengthen your adult-child bond. So that parenting bond is that time where you slow down, be intentional about building a relationship and having some conversations. And with that, just the having a conversation about something you might not typically have at home or in your daily routine. That book brings a new topic or concept. And then reading with your child also just encourages that imagination, that creativity, and even play about a variety of things and fantasy. So it helps grow that aspect as well. So using language to build literacy skills, what does that look like in your daily routine? And some of that is just narrating everything you're doing. So students who are deaf and hard of hearing miss some of that incidental learning that is going on around your home or in different sites. So being able to narrate, tuning in to where what your focus of your child is, talking more about that, and then engaging in turn taking and having a conversation about what they're focused on. And what you as a family are focusing on throughout the day. Think about signing or talking about experiences. So if you're going to a new place, talk about what you can expect or what your child can expect. This is an opportunity to introduce new vocabulary before you get there. And then as you're doing that experience, you can introduce it again and start to build some of those connections. And then ask questions after about the experience. What did they enjoy? Um, what did they think about a specific thing? And trying to think about varying your question types. So it's not just always yes and no, that you're asking them to expand a little bit more with their language. Singing and rhyming is another great way to build the rhythm of language. So even if it's you're making up a song, just thinking about that those rhythms and rhymes. And ASL and English each have their own rhyming conventions. So you can learn more about how those are similar and different in both languages. And lastly, just calling attention to print. It's surrounding us in our environment, and it's interesting how children can develop recognition of print and symbols ahead of being able to say the word or actually read it. So my favorite example is McDonald's, right? Like if your family goes to that restaurant, a lot of times kids recognize the sign before they can even tell you the name of the restaurant or um, even recognize some of those letters. So those are examples of just ways that you can point out print that's around you and start to build those connections. All right, and then thinking about how to create that language and literacy environment in your home. Um, One one thing to think about is how to minimize those auditory and or visual distractions when it's your time to read. So maybe that's turning off the TV or going to a space that's calmer so the focus can be on the book, but also remembering that you need to let your child drive the experience. So we don't want to force kids to sit for 20 minutes when it's maybe not their time. Maybe they just need to move at that point. So really trying to prioritize what time of the day works well for them to have some focus. And maybe it's just 5 minutes, or maybe as you work your way up as they grow older, into that longer amount of time. But trying to find where that fits into your um, daily routine. And maybe that's snack time, maybe that's at bedtime, or it could be while you're waiting for an appointment. So thinking about when works for them, um, but also making sure that they have books accessible to them. So having them in multiple spaces so they can choose when they want to read a book or look at it themselves. And that helps them drive that choice to want to read with you and also lets them show their interest. So that also goes to letting the kids pick out books and going to the library and finding those things that really interest your child. Um, and today it may be trucks, and tomorrow it could be uh, farm animals, or then it transitions into maybe a character from a TV show. So really letting them have some choice helps to build that interest and engagement with the reading. And then I know this is hard as parents, to reread a book that feels like 30 times. But that repetition is really good for building that language and building those literacy skills. All right, so let's now dive into some of the strategies that can support your child who is deaf and hard of hearing. So some of the strategies I'm going to talk about now is based on research that was a study of how deaf adults teach their deaf children to read. And out of that research was developed the 15 principles for reading to deaf children. And even though these principles are written from that lens of reading with your child using ASL, the principles apply regardless of that language choice that you're using, with just a few tweaks. So I'm going to share some of those strategies now. But if you're looking for a more in-depth look at all 15 principles, our office is hosting another webinar on this topic on May 12th. And I'm going to share a QR code at the end if you are interested in joining that event as well to learn more than just the strategies I'm going to touch on right now. So the first strategy is thinking about positioning. So finding what works best for your child for auditory access and or visual access. So society emphasizes the image of that child and the sitting in the parent's lap in that rocking chair, and that does work for some kids, but not for all. So really thinking about that position that works for your individual child and your family's needs. So that may be sitting on the floor so that your child can be facing you and you then can hold the book and maybe sign or have the child have access to your face while you're reading. So thinking about what might work best, or maybe that's sitting on a couch or in bed. So just thinking about how you can provide that visual access. Um, Another strategy could be utilizing mirrors. So if you have a floor to ceiling kind of big mirror like in your bathroom, that's another place that you could sit and still have your child on your lap, but letting them see the signs, or your face in the mirror. So it's another strategy you can use. And thinking about how to keep both languages visible. So if you're using ASL and also having the print on the book, so making sure that students have access to both, or even if you're focusing on spoken language, having access to your mouth and your lip formations while you're reading again, so they have access to the print as well. I've included in the resources a video that shows this has more details about positioning if you're interested in that. So you can kind of see what it might look like when you're thinking about different positions. All right, the next strategy is engaging in role play and activities. And this is something you do not have to be a teacher. You do not have to go overboard and look at Pinterest or research on the internet. It's really thinking about, here's a book. How can I expand on the topics or in play just into our daily routine? And one way to maybe make it more alive is just acting it out. So that could be changing voices and moving your body. It can also be using ASL. And maybe you don't know every single word that you're using, but that's where you can use gestures and movement to kind of help walk through the story. Taking turns with your child who may be a little bit older, between the characters. So maybe there's a book you're reading that has a very repetitive piece to it. Taking turns and let them be one character while you're reading the other parts. And then thinking about how you can incorporate that into the other play that you're doing throughout the day is into just free play with toys or playing games to make some of those connections, or also just drawing or coloring a picture, how you can take the topics from the story and include them in another scenario. So I'm going to give you a few more examples of what that might look like. So thinking about a fairy tale, something like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. This is something you could easily act out at home because you've got those items. You might not have porridge, but you can pretend with cereal and bring the snack time into this. You can have different chairs and pretend trying out the different chairs. Or then going to the beds and talking about that repetitive nature. You can use stuffed animals. You could have a doll be Goldilocks, or you can pretend that your child is Goldilocks. So there's lots of different ways that you can play, um, and have that multi-sensory experience. This also allows children to be the one retelling the story. So maybe after you've read it 3 or 4 times, you can incorporate this kind of free play into your routine and see how much your child can kind of navigate what's going on. Um, and definitely you are engaging and prompting them as well as they kind of retell the story. Another example I like to share is just a movement way of engaging your child throughout it and building some connections. So this example is the book The Napping House, where each time there's a new character building up, adding to the bed. And so you can use blocks to that your child can add each time a new character is joining the bed. And then at the end of the story, everyone gets flung out of bed. So you can knock over the blocks at that time. So really connecting what's happening in the story to a visual way of seeing how things have stacked up and then topple over. The next strategy is expand on the text. Okay, I'm going to be honest, this is the challenge alert. You have permission to do more with a book than just read the text. And that was something very hard for me to learn at first because I thought we have to follow what the words say. But really, it's so much more engaging and enriching if you're able to just use those pictures or use a story to really build that language and the conversations around what's happening. And part of that is making what's implied, maybe by a picture, um, explicit. So really explaining what's going on or having a conversation about that and pointing that out. So your child is seeing that in the pictures or understanding that there's more going on in the story than only the printed text. And so we have to look at all those clues together. Another part of this strategy is really modeling your thinking. So if there are two characters, um, doing something, you can add to it. I wonder what's going to happen next. Or I wonder how the two dogs are going to figure out how to find their ball. So modeling what you're thinking about the story is a great way to help encourage them to also be thinking about that. Um, and then asking some of those comprehension questions. And they don't, again, you need to think about your level of your child. So those are really going to vary. But asking them what's going on or what do you think will happen next? Those are just some ways that you can check to see how well your child is following on the story. And then bringing in those extra pieces to help them to start to predict what might happen, or just having some more conversation about the characters and what they may be thinking as well. So, my favorite example with how to practice this skill of describing and going past the text is using wordless picture books because there is no script. And so, this is your way to use language to describe the pictures. For example, oh, those waves are crashing, whooshing. The birds are flying high in the sky and looking for a snack. They found something to eat. So that's just an example of how you can take pictures and expand on them, but also it opens the door to have different conversations each time that you are reading the book because it's not always the same. Um, so these are example titles. Wave is one of a wordless picture book, and Flashlight is a new one I just learned about. And so the images in this book are the child putting a flashlight on different things throughout their journey. So this is a great example of after using the book, how could you do that in your home? So playing with the flashlight and having conversations about things that they're putting lights on. All right, and then another example. This book is called Kite Day, and it has this part of the story where if you only read the text, bear collected, mole studied. You might not, if you can pick out everything from the pictures, you get some more details. And so when we talk about expanding on the text, this is where having some of those conversations about the pictures really help the understanding of the story and realizing that there's a lot about the story that's being told just by pictures. So, for example, after you read Bear collected, oh, I see he's collecting the string for to make the kite. And then Mole studied, oh, I see he's reading a book. The title of that book is How to Make a Kite. Hmm, I think Mole is learning how to make their kite. So those are just examples of how you can expand, and that can be, and it's going to depend on what your child's focused on. Maybe they're going to want to talk more about the string or say, "Hey, I know we have strings somewhere." Um, so how you can use those pictures to really expand and tell more about the story that might not be written out in the print form of the book. All right, the next one is connecting concepts. So making connections between your experiences and a story to the real world. So for example, maybe it's time to go to the dentist. And so finding a book about that experience um, can also can help your child know what to expect, but then brings that to life of what we read in print to our experience of actually going to the dentist or making the connection with a real world objects of the toothbrush, right? Um, so those are ways you can really build those connections between what you're reading and what you're experiencing. Um, and also thinking about how you can connect real world objects or people to what you are reading. So, for example, if you're reading about trucks and there's a fire truck in there, so pointing out when you see a fire truck and trying to build that connection. Um, so thinking about how what you have in your environment is also connected to the things that you are reading in your stories. And that can be true all the way up as kids grow as well. So how you start making those connections, especially when they transition from learning to read into that reading to learn. So how can they build that background knowledge of what they know and connecting it to the story and understanding those connections from that real world perspective. All right, and then the next example is using experience books. So this is a way to take your real world experiences and connections you're having and put them into print and images on your own. Um, Sometimes that word, like you're making a book, can feel intimidating, but really, I want you to understand this is a category. This can take on a lot of different formats. Um, and And it might feel a little overwhelming to start something of kind of like think of it as a journal, but it's very, very basic. And again, can take on any form that works well for you. There's no wrong experience book, but find a way to build it into your routine. So maybe it's once a week, or maybe it's right before bed of having that reflection time of what did you do today and what can we maybe record about tonight that we did, the activities we did today? Or maybe it's just recording something from one experience. So these are just different examples of how you can create your own experience book. One is it's all in your phone. You took 8 pictures at the zoo today, and you can create an album in your phone, and then your child can flip through those pictures to recall what happened. You can also think about adding like a short caption to it, adding a text directly to the picture to again make those connections between printed words and their experiences. Again, that can be simple as just labeling the animal um, that you saw. So the kangaroo, for example. So that's one way to do experience books. Others is photo albums, and maybe you're making one just in one experience. Maybe you're doing it for as a way to introduce something that's coming up. So there's lots of different ways to do that, as well as just hand-drawn pictures or um, anything like in a plain notebook, anything that just works for you and your child, but it provides a way to talk about storytelling, about recall of the different activities, and just a way to connect that real world to a print format for children and something they can be proud of and share with other people. Um, and it's a way to have those conversation starters. All right, and the last thing is with these strategies is don't stop reading. So even as your child becomes more of an independent reader and you continue to build those skills, it's really important that you continue to read with them. Um, and finding a way that works well. So if they are still at that beginning stages of reading, you can you can bump up and read levels that are above them so that they continue to build that knowledge and building new vocabulary. Um, then also thinking about the creative ways that you can continue to engage with your child about different text. So maybe that's creating a little book club at home that you're both reading the book independently, and then you have some conversations at different points um, throughout the story about what they're reading. Or um, maybe you have that child that really needs the motivator to have some independent reading time. So one strategy is encouraging you have to read the book before you watch the movie. And then that also creates an opportunity to talk about what was the differences, what was same in those two things. So just another example of how you can continue that momentum and that engagement and that excitement to be reading even as your child grows. All right, so next thing is just highlighting some resources that you can explore to continue to learn about the different strategies and supports you can do at home. One thing is the resources from our office. We have 3 different libraries that we have available for you. It is free to create an account and then request materials. And our office will take your request, mail the materials to you, and then when it's time to return them, we provide the envelope and mailing instructions to return the books. So those 3 different libraries we have is first the DHH reading kits. So these are books that also come with strategies and activities that you can do at home. So they might have a game, they might have a craft. They also have videos in ASL so that you can learn the vocabulary that's included in the book. And some books even have the full story in an ASL version of it. So that is a free way that you can start with those engagements about books, and all those materials, the crafts, those types of things come with them. So please utilize this resource as a way to engage in some of those extra activities. We also have a DHH character book library. So these are all books that have a character who is deaf and hard of hearing. And this is another way that your child can relate to a character that may be in a book and can start to see themselves in a character. So we have a wide variety of different kids that utilize different languages, that use different technology. So there are a lot of options that you can pick from. And this library ranges from picture books, early chapter books, and even older chapter books. So all ages can utilize that resource. And then also we have a DHH resources library. A lot of that is a lot of our educational materials, but I wanted to mention it because we also have a lot of ASL resources in that section. So if you are using ASL at home and are looking for some of those resources or books that you can use to continue to learn ASL alongside your child, there are a lot of great resources you can find in there. And then also on our website, which is rdhh.org, you can find, we have a whole section on these literacy resources that live there. So if you misplace the resources I'm sharing tonight with that PDF, you can also find them, most of them directly on our website. I also wanted to highlight the Michigan Language Milestones for Deaf and Hard of Hearing. That resource is for children ages 0 to 5, and it is on the Lead K website, which also has a lot of great resources for families. And within that resource, there are also starting to highlight some of these pre-literacy skills. So on this screen, you're seeing that these are the skills for a 2 to 3-year-old, what we would expect them to start be doing. So that's just another way that you can kind of see what skills you can work on and what you might be expecting at the different age groups for these pre-literacy skills. And that research also has a lot of language milestones as well that you can check out. Here is a list of a lot of different videos to see these principles in action on how to support your child. So again, some of them are just positioning, some are learning more about those different strategies and the 15 principles. And I really like the videos because again, we can talk about them, we talk about them tonight, but seeing them in action, I think really help you to learn and see it, what we're talking about with these different strategies. So I really encourage you to find a few minutes. They're really short videos that you can see these different skills and kind of imagine what that might look like in your home. I also wanted to mention just some resources specific for reading books in ASL. These are all great resources to either support your ASL skills as you're developing them, or also thinking about different focus areas when you're using ASL. So About Love and Language book series, a lot of those focus on rhyming in ASL in an engaging way for students. The American Society for Deaf Children and DB Central and also the Shared Reading Project all have large lists of books that are told in ASL. So it's another resource that you can use. And Language First is another website that hosts monthly read alouds. So just another way that you can engage and continue to find different ways to read with ASL skills. And there is also just some other examples of some ASL storybook channels on YouTube. These are all reputable sources that do a really great job in telling stories in ASL if you're interested in those resources. And then just wanting to mention some other additional resources. Hands on Voices has an early literacy development handout specifically for deaf and hard of hearing kids. And also Hearing First is another resource that you can use. It has stuff about the experience books, strategies to read aloud to your child. So want to make sure to mention those as well. And then the other resources I have here are more general resources. So they might not have that deaf and hard of hearing lens, and so that may be something you have to add in. So for example, Talking is Teaching website, it has some really great resources, but it focuses on the word talking. And really, you just have to change your mindset. What we really mean there is language. So when you're taking time to focus on that language and how you can use some strategies at home to increase that language time. So I just want to make sure when I share some of these resources that sometimes you have to change that lens. But there still are really good information that you can use in your home. So just a quick wrap up of tonight. Reading with your child strengthens language and literacy skills. So remember that as you build that language, you're really strengthening their reading skills. And at the same time you are reading with your child, you're strengthening both language and literacy. So lastly, I just want to make sure I mention those upcoming events we have. So this is Tuesday, May 12th. This will also be on Zoom from 7 to 8. So we'll highlight all 15 principles for reading with children who are deaf and hard of hearing. And that will be for all language choices or a combination of. So please check that out. You can also find that directly on our website on the events page. And also wanted to mention Little Explorers, which is an event we hold in person at Camp Tusmahita, and which is in Greenville. So our next event is May 9th, and this is for families with children who are ages 0 to 5. And it's a great way to, again, experience a book, but having those different activities to go along with it and how you can connect nature and movement and songs and also send you home with some activities in the book for you to continue that experience afterwards. So here is just my wrap up of more information from our office with our website and events. And if you want to learn more about our updates, please feel free to subscribe and follow us on Facebook for more information. I am a part of a team, and our entire team is here to support you and answer questions. So please feel free to reach out to our office, but my contact information is there if you have specific questions that you would like to ask me directly. So thank you so much for having me again tonight. I hope this was beneficial and just a way to keep thinking about how you can encourage language and literacy learning in your home.